Chris, good to see you. Thanks for making a bit of time to come and have a chat. I know you've been busy, and I appreciate you making time to come and have a chat because you've got a lot on your plate at the moment. I want to kick off by going back to something that we talked about some time ago now. It's stuck in my mind because it's a really interesting statement, which I think is true. Actually, I mean, you may actually disagree, but we'll come to that in a second. You said to me, most doctors are terrible at selling. Now, I think my view is that that's because they're good at doctoring, and
Yeah.
we do the selling stuff. Why did you say that, and what does that mean in the context of your business? Because you've got a particular focus. Let me just tell people about that.
Yeah. So firstly, good to see you again, and thank you for having me on your podcast. So I work with sort of cash-based medicine. So plastic surgeons, aesthetic
Right.
medical spas, wellness clinics. So it's cash-based. And if we look at sort of the education system for doctors, it's medicine.
Yeah.
So the traditional doctor ends up, in hospitals, private practices, and you know, treating symptoms. But cash based, the aesthetic side is as effectively is sales. At the front end,
Yeah.
I call it ethical sales. So medicine has to come first, but they have to sell the treatment because people are, it's an optional decision if they buy it or not. And so doctors, medical staff are pretty lousy at sales. It's not in their psyche. You know, Quite often, they're not great at business either. And they'll admit it. I'm not being derogatory to these people. That's not their focus. And yet they're in medical, well, they're in a cash based business. So I even go one stage further. Prior to sort of moving into this cash-based medicine, I worked with corporates from a sales training, sales consulting point of view, but I also work with small businesses. Small business owners themselves are lousy at sales. And it's where as we say in sales, it's where the tire hits the road. And if you can't sell your product or your service, then you don't have a business.
Yeah. So, Chris, I
So,
mean, I agree with you about that. I mean, my view is broadly the same. I think the upside is that, I might be good at sales, I'd be a terrible doctor. So, in one sense, I'm quite glad that they're good at doctoring and not so good at sales. I mean, that doesn't have a problem, but it's just a skill set, is it? It's just something you can learn. But, I mean, learning to sell is a different debate, really. Tell us about how you're using tech to help people fix that problem, because that's really the interesting bit. You're saying there's a way to help address that. Tell us about that.
yeah. So what I found, ultimately, medical people don't want to sell, um, and so how do we address that? So we actually run a contact center for cash-based medicine practices, and we take the patient life cycle, so that business piece, away from them per se. We integrate our technology into their practice. We provide a seamless experience for the patient. So when a patient phones the practice, they're actually phoning our team, and we are engaging with the patient as the practice. It was interesting. I was listening to some text, or saw some text messages, and one of this patient actually said, "I've been dealing with Erin in the practice," and I'm thinking that's such a great, because Erin doesn't live in the practice; she lives,
Yeah, yeah,
out.
that's a great,
She's
it's a
part of
great
our team.
recommendation, though, isn't it? It shows you're doing it. It shows they
Yeah,
believe what they're. Yeah, I mean, it's great.
yeah. Yeah, I love that, and it's for me. It's always, when we get that sort of, will I meet you when I come in next Tuesday for my appointment, and we have a way of handling that because we're not even in the same town as town as you. So, but yeah, it's that technology can be seamless,
Yeah,
and that's really important. Case in point. we've got a client. We're based in the US. We have a client and building more in Australia, which is coming online in the next week or so. So we're going to be doing all of the answering, responding to leads from a US based team supporting medical practice in Australia. It's There's no boundaries now.
No, that's right. And it's great. I mean, my view is that technology is an enabler and it's enabling you to do something that you couldn't do otherwise, which seems to me to
Yeah.
be a pretty good thing, really. And you're also enabling those cash-based medical businesses to sell their products, which is what they want, which is a good thing. I mean, those are
Yes.
really good things. Let me take you back to the start. So, I mean, how did you end up on that? I mean, where did your journey start here? I mean, how did you end up on the path that you're on now?
Uh, So, yeah, that's a great question. So, um, I started my career as a ski instructor.
Really?
uh,
Okay.
I told my parents I'm going away for 6 months and came back 5 years later. And I was 20. I actually turned 21 in the French Alps. And you're so full of yourself at that age, you can
Yeah.
do anything.
Yeah.
And without seeming what's the word I'm looking for? I can't even think of the word, but it's oh, I can't. But I, I went away a boy and came back a man, and it's
Right.
what's the word I'm looking for there? It doesn't matter, but it's corny, as
Right.
corny as it sounds. I left as a boy and came back a man, and it really taught me how to interact with people, how to
Right.
deal with different situations. And, during that time, we dealt with a lot of happiness. People are on skiing holidays. We also had a tragedy or two, that happens. And at 21, dealing with, a death is quite, you know, quite gut wrenching. You learn. And then I came back from there and I was living in the UK and I joined IBM in a sort of telesales role, as it was called then, moved into field sales, went from there into Intel Corporation, ended up running BP globally. And I wanted to be a senior vice president for Intel, and they funded my MBA. And really, that was my stepping stone into setting up nearly 20 years ago a sales training and sales consulting company. And I became the product and I became that consultant, that trainer. And I went after corporates. That was my thing. I understood it. So I ran the first enterprise sales training for Google worldwide.
Wow.
Adobe was a client, BMW, Bacardi, NetApp, GE Medical. If it's corporate, I worked with those types of companies. I moved over to the US. And really, I was flying around the world for Google, and I thought, well, I can have a better weather. I can have better weather in California than I can in sort of London. And I'm flying around the world, so why don't I start from San Francisco
Yeah.
versus starting from London? But I got to that stage where I'm the product, so it relies on me.
Mm.
And I thought I need to scale this, and I also wanted, from a personal point of view, to focus on or have more of an engagement, more of a relationship with people. And I love working with Google and all these corporates, but you sort of fly in, you do your thing, you leave, you have a great interaction for those few days, but then you've gone. And I know I've impacted lives because people still message and say, "Thank you for the training. Thanks for this. You really changed my perspective." And so you do, but you don't get. I wasn't getting enough, and so I started looking for small businesses, and that's how I got into the small business space. And I was speaking at San Diego Startup Week, probably about 6, 7 years ago now. And this lady came up to me and said, "I'd like you to come and do some sales training for my business." And so, that's why I'm speaking at these sort of things, is to get, some inquiries. And I said, "What do you do?" She said, "I have 5 plastic surgeons and 7 med spa providers."
Mhm.
To which I replied, "I do B2B, I don't do B2C, and I certainly don't understand cash-based medicine, or, I didn't even know if it was aesthetic or cosmetic, or, I didn't even know the terminology." So I said, it's not what I do. And she had written the Dummy's Guide to Cosmetic Surgery and said, "I understand this industry, and I think what you have is different." And she kind of convinced me. And at the same time, I'm thinking, she's willing to pay. It's a job. Why not?
Could be
And we
fun.
converted. Yeah, and it was very different. And so we converted my corporate training into what, as I say, ethical selling, medicine first, but we have to sell. And we added $1 million of incremental revenue to her practice in a few months.
Wow.
No more extra leads, just just teaching them how to sell in an appropriate way for nurses to sell in a way that was comfortable for them, for the
Now,
plastic
let
surgeons.
me ask you about that. I mean, we'll come on to the platform that you developed in a second, but let me ask you something. I hear a lot people saying, "Oh, sales, that's just like customer service." It's not quite the same, is it? I mean, just give us a sense of how you see the difference between those two things. Because lots of people say, well, our customer service is good. That isn't necessarily what drives an increase in sales, though, is it?
No, it's that can be an enabler for the sales
Yeah.
people to, one of our benefits is we've got great customer service, but customer service is, almost sort of the reactive piece in my mind in
Yeah.
terms of, you know, supporting the customer post the sale. Say for me, sales is a being of service, and it's in simple terms, what's the client's wants and needs, and what are they trying to achieve from a business perspective, and then how do you marry that to what you bring to the party, and how do you then add value to them, and the more value you can add, the less price becomes an issue. And I always think if you're talking about price of a product or service, they haven't understood the value that you bring, or maybe you don't bring enough value to them, so therefore price does become the factor they talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's very well put, actually. So, to come back to your platform, though, I mean, I interrupted you because of that.
No, no.
Just carry on with what you were talking about in terms of the step towards your platform and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so we saw the results, and she was blown away,
Right.
and I could tell the impact that we had by her reaction, to what we had developed, or achieved with the team, and so that became, as I said, I wanted to find a different industry. I wanted smaller businesses. I wanted to be more localized, where I've got relationships beyond just what I call the wash and a wax. Turn up and leave. The car looks gleaming, but it's going to sort of lose its shine once it rains. And so I sort of found it. But what I then found again is, medical people don't necessarily want to learn to sell. They would rather spend more money on the marketing side, more leads. The conversion rate is what it is. More leads, therefore more revenue, but you're still as potentially inefficient as you were.
That's another really interesting point. I mean, why? I mean, I see that a lot. People think that if you just get more leads in, the problem will be solved. Why do you think people don't recognize the importance of the conversion process? I mean, what's going on there, do you think? Because it happens in lots of places, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. What I'm talking about, we've niched into,
Mm.
the aesthetic world, but the reality is everything I'm talking about applies to all businesses. I sales is no one really wants to do sales.
Mm.
um, it's there's quite often a preconceived idea of what it is, and I spend more time, I think, reframing what it is, especially in this world of medicine. I spend more time reframing and and sort of teeing it up. But what was the question again?
It was about why people spend boatloads of money on marketing to generate
Yeah,
leads, and then they don't pay attention to the process of converting those leads into sales, which has always struck me as being a bit of an odd thing. I don't because it doesn't strike me as a big leap of logic to say the conversion rate's low, you could lift it by doing, but people
yeah.
don't. I mean, that's what I was curious about.
Yeah, bigger companies do. So bigger companies recognize there's a marketing function, and then it comes into sales. And sales is a function of marketing. So when you do a master's degree, an MBA, there's no sales element. It's sales is a function of the marketing anyway. That's the reality, but it's a big function. Um, so bigger companies do invest in sales training and sales consultancy,
Yeah.
and putting in teams and understanding the workflow or the sales process. I think a lot of smaller businesses, small, medium businesses survive because it works. They've done the marketing. They feel that, the lead comes in, they've got a conversion rate, maybe it's 30%, and they can, it's growing. And so therefore, if they can increase, simply if they can double their marketing and they get more leads, that's going to increase their revenue. And so on the surface, it looks successful. Um, there is that sort of curve that sort of the more leads you get, the volume drops because you haven't got the infrastructure from a sales
Yeah.
perspective
Right.
to
You do
support
it
it.
all the time, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, um, that's been always my approach was actually, if we can convert more, if we can, plastic surgery in the US, the conversion rate is 40%. So if you can take them from 40% to 60%, that's a
Big win.
big step change. No additional leads, no additional workload, just doing a better job through that sales process, the consult process with the patient. You drive significant revenue. And that goes again for all businesses. You can move the needle significantly. The problem is training takes effort, it takes time. Small businesses, you're often reliant, on one individual. So if they then leave, are sick, disappear, then you've put all that money into training them, and they've gone. And so and the other side actually is, and I see this a lot, they don't know how to then manage the salesperson. So when I go into a smaller business, and recently I was doing a medical practice in Florida, working with this practice, I spent more time putting in the infrastructure for the practice to manage this individual and what to expect, in a way, than training her how to sell. That was a big proponent of it, but actually it was the leadership team and how to manage
I
that.
mean, it's a very interesting point that. I mean, I come across that all the time. Leadership teams that don't understand the sales process. And the problem with that is that they then can't be sure that their staff are doing the right things. So they recruit people, then they find out 6 months later that they haven't sold anything or that they're not selling very much because they don't really understand what they should have been doing.
Yeah.
Similar
And they
sort
don't know how to recruit that person in the
yeah,
first place
yeah.
because
No, it's a bit of a challenge, really, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, it's, salespeople are different animals, which makes them, good, good at what they do. And you need to understand how to manage them to get the best out of them. And sort of your normal leadership style, may not always work with who they are and how they operate.
And your solution then is to do it for them.
Yes, yeah. And so that was the evolution. Is we I had felt I sort of achieved, okay, we've achieved an amazing result with this practice. Let's go and replicate that. Surely everyone's going to want it. And people, one or two did. And it seems to be growing a little bit in the US. People are recognizing sales as important, but it's still, it's still, all the problems we've said still exist.
Yeah.
And so we then said, why don't we do it for you? You're happy to give money to marketing agencies to get marketing. Give us some of that money and we'll just run the sales process for you and manage that patient life cycle. Book them, post consult, follow up. If they book on the day with the provider, great. If they don't, we'll follow up. We've got the relationship with them.
Yeah.
They don't, again, the patient doesn't see us. They just see the practice. We're just sort of an external entity that just happens. And so we then manage that process underbedded by technology, AI, and all of those elements to sort of manage the whole process and manage the patient
Mm.
seamlessly.
The thing I like about it is that the patient doesn't know. They don't feel it's any different, do they? That's one of the
No,
things really nice about it.
yeah,
So
it's
yeah, it's a really positive thing, that.
yeah. Some of our small, we have a solo injector in Florida, and she's very open. She's told her staff that she's outsourced it to a company that just does it all for her. And so she's very open and transparent about it. But some of the bigger practices, it's not part of the conversation. It doesn't need to be. And at the end of the day, as long as people are getting served, in the professionally with emotion, and there's a human connection, rapport, all of that. If they're getting all of that, and then they're getting their appointment and the treatment they want, they're getting fulfilled, and so they're not worried how it happens to some extent.
No, that's all under the bonnet, as they say, isn't it?
Yes,
Under
yeah.
the hood. And I mean, it sounds to me like a great proposition. I mean, I don't know the sector very well, but it sounds to me like a great proposition. Where are you going with it? I mean, what are you trying to? I mean, just give us a sense of what you're trying to achieve here. I mean, what are you building towards, would you say?
That's actually a really good question. The lady I mentioned at the very beginning, she had this. She was 72 when I met her, and that was 7, 8 years ago now.
Wow.
Um, but she had this whole philosophy is she had as well as her own practice, she had a software company as well supporting other plastic surgeons, and she had this sort of make great doctors better. And because that was sort of my first, in a way, mentorship into this industry, I've sort of got that, you know, sort of ingrained. I spent sort of 9 months on this project with her, and I just, and I learned a huge amount from her. And the reality is, cash-based medicine is a massive industry. I
Right.
think I read a quote that there are more med spas now in the US than McDonald's.
Really?
So,
Wow. That is
so
extraordinary.
it's just, again, you see these things and you think, well, how accurate is that? Perhaps I ought to go and check the data. However, you drive anywhere and
So you've
there's,
got a big market to go at. That's what you're
there's a
saying.
huge market, a
Yeah.
huge market. It's funny because someone said today, you're in quite a niche, and it's like, yeah, we're in a very niche industry, but it's a huge niche, and so I think that's at my core. There's that sort of her philosophy in terms of these doctors are great at what they do. They make people feel good.
Yeah.
A lot of doctors in this space call it happy medicine. You're dealing on the nice side,
Yeah.
be it Botox and filler, people come out feeling better about themselves.
Hmm.
And because I'm now, again, when I first came into the industry, I thought all of that was just, oh, it's all baloney. However, recently I saw a recording of a podcast I was on, and I looked angry because when I concentrate, my forehead, and so one of our local clients is in Beverly Hills, so I said, "Can I come in for some Botox, please?" And so I had some Botox. I think they call it the 11s and the lines, and your crow's feet, just because I didn't want to look angry. When I'm on video, and so there's a whole myriad of emotions and reasons why people approach happy medicine, as doctors often say, to get these treatments. And so I think our sort of underlying drive is, you're helping people be happier, more confident.
Yeah.
You're helping the doctors deliver that, because people will go and find a solution, and so let's make sure that they find the right solution, and so we can help guide people through that process, which is the sales process. But make that, I've got a want and a need. How do we marry that to what we can offer and get them booked with the provider, the medical professional, to then provide that treatment.
Yeah. I mean, and I mean, it seems to me to be. a good thing. I mean, making people happy doesn't seem to me to be a terrible thing. That seems to me to be a good thing, really. I mean, I know there's some issues about maybe some people can't access that, which is a different debate. But what it seems to me that making people happy is a good thing.
Yeah, I
So,
think so. I think so. And you're right. Um, there's always that accessibility, challenge. um, and yeah, but I think that exists, in all industries. There was an can I afford to do it? But it's also the priorities people have
yeah.
and where they want to spend their disposable income and what's important or more important.
Yeah. Let me ask you about being the CEO. I mean, how do you feel about the job? I often call it in small businesses, I call it Chief Everything Officer, not Chief Executive Officer. I mean, how do you feel about the job?
Um, yeah, it's funny because on the bottom of my signature on my email it says CEO and co-founder, and but nothing's changed. For me, nothing's changed. I remember speaking at a conference in Malaysia a few years ago, and we had we'd organized a number of speakers at this event. One of them was the CEO of one of the big helicopter manufacturers,
Well,
and he came on stage and said, I'm the CEO, I'm the chief entertainment officer. Um,
okay.
and of course, and this guy's the global CEO, and that's how he really introduced himself. And it really made me think, and he's about setting the tone of the whole business.
Yeah.
And 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 helicopter, it was interesting because helicopters, you know, this is a big, serious business. And he actually made a point. He said helicopters these days will not crash; they won't fall out of the sky. And yet you think, well, they do, but but the technology, everything they've got in place, it can't happen. There's a reason why, if it does, it's and then it's normally maintenance and other elements. So he's running this very serious business, and yet he's presenting himself but what he was doing was setting the tone of who he is, and I see that in my for me it's about setting not just setting the strategy and the vision and all of those things and driving the company. It's about setting that tone of who we are and what we're doing and why this is important. And yes, I've got multiple hats, and as we grow, my job is to hand those hats to other professionals to sort of manage. But I don't ever see that sort of setting the direction with the leadership team over time and setting the tone of the business and what we stand for. As I think that's for me the critical thing here,
Yeah.
because I think if you've got
Seeing as you've
gone.
just mentioned what you stand for, I mean, let me ask you, in what way would you say your values have influenced the way you've approached building the business?
Oh, every way.
Give us an
um,
example.
so so yesterday I was um, a final interview, and it's strange because I sometimes question myself: is this the right approach? I'm very reflective. Um, and most companies are very much sort of, okay, we want you to do this from here to here. And my approach is, what's your availability? What works for you? Why, you know, and I had two interviews yesterday, and two final interviews yesterday, and both were the same sort of conversation. One is this very talented, very passionate 23-year-old. What came really clear is she's on her summer break. She's 23, 24. So she's on a summer break from school. Come the fall, autumn, she's got Tuesdays where she'll be at school and Thursday mornings. And she's training over the next 5 to 6 years to be a therapist. And nothing is going to get in her way. And so we've got this ability to tap into this, amazing young professional dynamic woman, but we have to recognize that Tuesdays and Thursdays her school and her career is more important than anything. And I love that. And I think, you know, she's willing, what became really exciting was I don't see that as a problem. And And clearly it was, because it's clearly it was a problem for so many other companies, because
Mm.
she made that point and I said, hey, it's not a problem. I'd rather have someone for, you know 2 hours a day, as long as they're consistent, that are great, than not have them at all. And so it's tapping into human beings and meeting them where they are. And I think so often we come at this from this is what I need from a business perspective. And again, maybe it's naive of me as we go from a small business to a medium-sized business. But I think if you've got the structures and actually the value base in place, then then there's ways to solve that and deliver what humans need as part of their lifestyle, because no one's going to have the same passion as me about my business than me and my co-founder. But if we can give them what they need, and it's not just sort of money, but it's purpose, and but also the space for them to grow as a human being, and achieve their goals, then we can
It's a
be on that
win-win, really,
journey
isn't it?
together.
You can do
Yeah.
that. It's a win-win. Let me ask you about the flip side to that. I mean, what kind of decisions do you find most difficult being the chief entertainment officer?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm the chief entertainment officer. Um, uh, that can be quite amusing at times.
I'm going to say our conversations have always been quite entertaining. So
Yeah, no,
maybe. But anyway, what decisions do you find most difficult, perhaps?
the so I was very fortunate, as I mentioned earlier. Intel funded my MBA. The first week of the MBA was the fundamentals of business, and they taught me about vision, mission, objective, strategy, and tactics. You know, week one. If you're really clear, and let's simplify that. If you're really clear on where you want to get to, then decisions become easy because you're clear where you're going. Decisions become hard for me when I lose that sort of actually where we're getting to. And quite often what can happen is I want to get to here. You get there, you don't necessarily recognize you're there, and you haven't set the next
Yeah.
step. And so now at
Drift,
that
don't
point,
you? Drift.
yeah, the decisions become tricky then. And at that point, you think, and often it's actually we need to step back. What are we trying to achieve next? And that's where I find decisions are tricky. Is not recognizing then we've achieved that. And sometimes it's not necessarily a revenue goal, or it's not necessarily tangible. It's sometimes even just a feeling you're there. And so actually, where do we need to get to next? But I think if you're really clear, and again, I remember doing a program. I was working for Intel in the UK, and I wanted to do this program. And at the same time, I was coming up to my dissertation for my MBA. So I combined this desire with making it about my dissertation, which then facilitated Intel giving me some time to go to the US to do this course. And out of that course, it became really clear for me that Intel's not my future. That ultimately I wanted to be a sales trainer, corporate sales trainer, consultant. And from that moment on, everything I did was towards that. And spending money was about that goal. Nothing. It was black and white. And so again, I think that clarity at a personal level where you want to get to, a bit like that young lady yesterday, she wants to be a therapist. Nothing's going to get in her way. So how do you support that? And that's the same for decision making. If you're really clear, then it becomes, very
I
not
mean,
easy.
somebody famous said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. And I think it's a really
Yeah.
important thing to remember. Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it is, but you're absolutely right. It's easy to lose sight sometimes of the where you're going, isn't it?
Yes.
One of the things that I talk to entrepreneurs a lot, and most of them say they make a lot of mistakes. I mean, what's your take on that? Do you make a lot of mistakes?
Yeah, I remember when I first set up the company, a good friend, mentor introduced me to a CEO of another leadership training company in the
Right.
Windsor area. And I'm fresh out of being a businessman for Intel. So it came with an ego, which was eradicated pretty quickly. But I met this CEO, and he almost looked at it as a P&L statement. Is you've got to make more good decisions than bad decisions. You've got to, you're going to make mistakes. You just hope that you're making, more things go right than more things go wrong. And it is that profit equals revenue minus costs. Good outcomes, the mistakes. As long as you're making more bigger ones than that, you're in profit. And I think you've got to just, accept that it's, you know, you know, you've got to accept that everything can be good and bad, and right now you can make a decision that's good, but actually ultimately it's bad, and you don't know that because everything's changing so rapidly, and and you can't really you can celebrate the success in the moment as well, but it also can change over time. So you've just got to recognize that you're making a ton of mistakes, and I think I come back to my sort of input, or that guru, and just get more things right than wrong, and then you're in profit.
Yeah, no, I mean,
um
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Um,
yeah.
I mean, it's easier to say than do, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's about the balance, isn't it, really? If you're making more good decisions than bad, there's a reasonable chance you'll make progress.
Yes, it's. I think the other thing we find ourselves saying quite a lot is, well, we've learned from that. And then there comes a point, I'm 57. At what point do I stop learning?
Yeah.
And we joke because I don't think you should ever stop learning. However, it's and the other thing my mum always rolls her eye is, we're on a journey, mum. We're on it because she loves to know what we're up to, and it's like, we're on a journey. It's like, just get there, and it's
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah. 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 And what would you say is the biggest mistake you've made?
Um, oh gosh. Yeah, that's a great. Normally have answers for everything. What's the biggest mistake? Um, I don't know, and that's, yeah, I genuinely don't know. There's just so many.
Well, let me ask
um,
you a similar
yeah.
question, but a slightly different way. So, if you look back on the decisions that you've made, would you say that which has cost you more, bad decisions or delayed decisions? Would you say which one of those has caused more problems for you?
Um, the answer is delayed. Without a doubt. I don't suffer from delayed decisions. So we just decide. And I was fortunate enough to spend 5 years with Intel, and it was really interesting. This was 2000-ish, and uh, the interview process was really interesting. I can't remember; it was 6 or 7 interviews,
Mm.
but every time I interviewed was, how do I manage change? How do I cope with change? You know, what happens if you get hired to do this and now you're doing that? And it was very strange because it was, and I was coming from IBM,
Mm.
so steady big ship. You have to fight to change things there, or back then it was. I don't know what it's like now, but and this was just, how do I, and there was more time spent about change than anything else. And I think in the first 12 months I had 9 jobs. I was hired for one thing. That business was then pulled into into another business unit, so therefore I was moved into this, and it was just all change. And Intel really had this philosophy of just execute, make the decision, go forward. If it's the wrong decision, then change direction. And they really taught me about disagree and commit. So you could sit around and all put your point of view forward, and then the leader and the team would say, okay, we're going to do this. And you had that ability to say, I disagree, and commit. So it basically wiped out. I'm not happy, but I'm not going to sabotage this, which can go on in other,
Yeah.
companies.
Yeah.
I don't agree. I think this is the wrong thing, but I'm 100%. And everyone was on the same, going in the same direction, and we executed. And it wasn't get to a point where it went wrong and then I told you so, because at that point it was like, okay, we're now going in this direction, and it was very much that way. And um, my business partner and I are very, we know where we're going. Again, it's that decision making. Once we come to that sort of junction, it's like, okay, we've got to do this, and execute. You've got to look at things. What's your cash flow to facilitate this, change in direction, or do this and do. So it has to be within the context of, there's a business here, and there's people who are expecting to be paid in 2 weeks' time, etc. So you've got to look at the, all of the elements. But yeah, it's a really good question. I think the other thing with me is I've got such a positive outlook on life. So even when things have gone wrong, I've got this ability just to say, okay, what did I learn from that? How do we move forward? So when you ask, what's my biggest mistake? It's really that's going to be one of those questions that I probably wake up in the morning at 3 a.m. and went, that's what it was. And then it will come flooding to me that, oh my God, that was a big decision. That was a
Yeah,
big
if it's
mistake.
3 o'clock in the morning, don't call me.
Yes. Well,
I
with
mean,
our time difference, you'll be fine.
yeah, well, maybe. I mean, I had an interesting conversation with the CEO the other day, and he made a really interesting point. He said, "I don't worry about making mistakes." He said, "Because the risk is not making mistakes. The risk is missing out on the opportunity," which I thought
Yeah.
was a really interesting way to look at it, actually. Because inevitably you make mistakes, so you can't actually avoid them completely. I mean, there are things you can
No.
do to improve your decision making. But you can't totally avoid them. So he said, I don't worry about that. I think about, am I doing enough to exploit the opportunity rather than am I doing enough to stop making mistakes? Which I thought was an interesting sort of angle on that. Um, One of the other things that's interesting, though, is that as businesses grow, you've got a team of people. How do you, is it, as it were, enable your team to learn the lessons? Because if we do make mistakes, you then want to correct them. How do you make sure you learn those things, you learn from those things, and that those lessons are kind of captured and rolled forward, and that you don't make as many of the same mistakes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I remember in my first team leadership role in IBM, um, one of my team, Spencer was his name. He came up to me and said, I've screwed up, and it's and sort of one of my 23, 24, and I said, that's fine. What do you learn from it, and let's not make it again. And that was sort of my basic starting point with no leadership development at that point in my career. But for me, I create this environment of openness, honesty. We are a team, and it's very easy to say we're a team, and not live by that. We are a team. So for me, uh, if we make a mistake with, and because we're in a live environment, we're taking calls, we're responding to text messages. If we make a mistake with a patient, we need to call that out quickly, and so that we can then handle that with our clients. So we're handling the patients, but our client is the medical practice. And people, we're humans, we make, mistakes are made, so we need to understand that. If you create an environment where people won't speak out because they're going to get into trouble, and then you start closing the doors, and then things are hidden under the carpet. And I'm very clear with the team is, if you're not going to get into trouble for making a mistake. You will get into trouble if you try and hide it, because we will find out. So for me, it's that sort of, I don't care what you do, we'll work as a team. I will protect you against our client that may been upset, or things happen. That doesn't faze me. But let's not play politics. Let's not hide things. Let's not um, cover things up. Any of that, my tolerance level goes right down. And and sometimes things have happened. You think, crikey, but it's and you got to live through on. Follow through and said, hey, let's fix this. What happened? What can you do differently next time? How did that? What technology again? What technology? What processes? What infrastructure can we provide that supports you getting a better outcome next time, rather than in a way sometimes putting that onus on you to decide whilst you're on the phone with a patient and you made the wrong call. So uh yeah, again, it's about creating that culture that
And
is so important.
have you, I mean, have you had situations where the business has grown beyond your expertise? And if so, how did you deal with that?
um I think it's recognizing what is your expertise,
Hmm.
and then you know at any stage, the business is beyond my expertise. Um, but it's recognizing what do I bring to this, and what is my strengths, and where am I weak, and building then people around you that the business shouldn't be me, and it's not. There's Paul, the co-founder, myself. He has a very different set of skills than I do, and if I didn't have him as a co-founder, we wouldn't be where we are. He brings immense value. But I also recognize that, between the two of us, we have our limitations. And as we grow, then who's the next person that needs to come on board, at a leadership level, or anywhere across the organization. So for me, it's not a, I know any point the company's beyond my capability, but my capability isn't to do everything. My capability is to come back to where I started, in terms of where are we going, how are we going to get there, and then what are the people that we need around the organization to support it. And again, I think I'm 57 now, so you start looking at things differently than when you're 30s or 40s. I still have an ego, but it's not the ego I had when I was in sales, and all that. And I think so often we think we need to be able to do things, and I've got to that point in my life, and like, you know, I don't want to, I'm not good at it. I don't want to do it. It's not my skill set. And I've got no ego to try and pretend that it is. At times I even get to the point where I think, what about if I appoint a CEO? Could they drive the business faster than I could? And I go and focus, and that would be quite an interesting dynamic. So I appoint someone, I report to the CEO effectively, or I take this nominal chairman position, but actually I'm the biggest shareholder of the company. So I'm so I don't know. There's part of me that thinks, I can, put a CEO in the business to run it, and I think in 5 to 7 to 10 years, I think that's kind of where, unless we're bought out with a serious amount of money, that's ultimately, I think, where I go, is become that sort of chairman. Still keep, an eye on where the ship's going, because I love business. I love the dynamic, you know elements that sort of that impact it. So yeah, I don't know if that's answering the question or
Yeah, no,
just.
it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting point you're making about it could outgrow you at any point in time because you don't know everything about, well, and that's an interesting take on it, I think.
Take
Uh,
AI. AI
yeah, yeah.
is I was talking to one of our clients yesterday, and the guys. I've got to be careful in case he watches this, and I call him, say he's older than I think he is, but let's say he's mid to late 30s, early 40s. But when he talks about AI and how he's using it, I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a Luddite, and I think I'm
Yeah.
quite with it, from a technology point of view. But he's just embedded, Claude into everything, and so I'm recognizing that, I'm being blindsided to some extent, well, probably actually a big extent by AI, but that's fine. I've got to recognize that. Then who do I find that can bring us up to speed as a business to put AI, and we are using AI. I'm just seeing that we could use it more embedded, in more processes, more often, and not just from a point of view, it's the trendy thing to do, but that gives us significant business benefit. So again, I'm outgrown in that regard, but being able to recognize it and then fixing it is the key.
I guess it's being comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah. And a
yeah.
couple of final questions before we wind up. So if you were starting again, I mean, you've been on the, very long and interesting journey. I mean, if you were starting again, anything you'd do differently this time around, perhaps?
See, I'm very philosophical about this. It's you are where you are, and
Yeah.
we've got to this point because of the journey we've been on. And I've been self-sufficient for 20 years now. Not always profitable, but we've had no safety, and moving to the States, there's no sort of unemployment benefit if it all goes wrong.
The safety net. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
there's no safety net. So um it's I think one of the things I would probably do, well, I don't know, when I set off, I wanted to be the consultant, I wanted to be the trainer. I loved that was my passion. um as I've gotten older, I want a scalable business, so it's not reliant on me. So whether or not, if I started again, I would look for that scalable option from day one. But then that would have taken away my passion, which was consulting and training, and I wouldn't have had the experiences I've had and the learning from all of that
Mm.
to get me to where I am. So, it's a really, yeah. Again, I say I've got a very positive outlook on life, and you know, I've I've never wished for anything other than where I'm at.
Well, then
And
you're very
so,
lucky. It's probably the right.
yeah,
That sounds like a pretty good thing to
yeah,
me. One last question. If you were to offer a rookie CEO a bit of advice, what might that be?
tenacity, just relentlessness. Keep going. It's just keep, yeah,
I mean, there was a
just keep
famous US
going.
president who said perseverance is everyone. I can't remember who it was, but one of them. And I think it's a really good
Yeah.
point. You just got to stick at it sometimes.
Yes, yeah, and there's everyone you speak to, who's running their own business, whatever the facade is, once you get to know them, there's desperation just beneath the
Yeah,
surface.
yeah, yeah.
um, and
That's very true.
it is the same. It's a few weeks ago we were, it was like, oh, and it's the mindset. I think sometimes one or things don't go your way, you then start sort of, you're tired because you're working so hard, and then you start sort of, you know extrapolating what could go wrong, and suddenly you're in this dark place. um and then you have a good night's sleep, and suddenly you wake up and there's something good, external things are happening. And so, yeah, it's recognizing that it's a roller coaster. It's recognizing that it's not going to always go the right way, but it's just, be confident in who you are, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and keep going. And I always remember I wanted to do this MBA when I was at Intel, and someone said, "Oh, you should read this book," and it was The Nightmare of an MBA. It was something like
The
that was
book
the
was it?
title. And it was, yeah, it was a book, and the whole book was, how it's going to, because an MBA is you got 40, especially an executive MBA where you're working full time. It's an
Quite
additional
hard work,
15
aren't
hours,
they? Yeah.
15 hours a week on top of that to study, and blah 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 blah. So it was called The Nightmare of an MBA. or something very similar. And it just was a whole book of, why not to do this and how it's going to change your life and this. And it was absolutely negative. And I loved it. It was just, it actually spurred me on. And I kind of want to write the nightmare of being an entrepreneur, because it's the cash flow, even at the best of times, is, 1 minute you've got a ton of money in the bank, next minute you're thinking, how am I going to do payroll
Yeah,
next month?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Look, people don't
and
understand that. It's a tough gig. It's a really
it,
tough gig, I think.
yeah, and I was working for this big company. I won't mention any names, but I'm running a big leadership workshop for this corporation. And I was working for one of the country divisions, and I'm standing there with the CEO and the CFO, and this chief human resources or HR director came up and said, "We've got a problem. Can I speak to you two?" And I'm standing there, and they said, "Oh, just speak. Chris is fine." And it's like, we're not, and we're talking 200 plus employees, and it's like, we're not going to make payroll. And it's just like, and it's like, we're doing this leadership conference, and the future, and we're not going to make payroll. And it's like, okay, what do we need to do? We need an overdraft facility of, and
Yeah,
and it just made me think that, because you think I'm a small business, when I don't make payroll, or I'm sort of having to juggle a few things, it's because I'm a small business. This is, the global company is over $1 billion business. I think it's 4 or 5 billion, but they weren't going to make payroll and had to get an overdraft facility to
yeah.
facilitate it.
I mean,
And they
my
were,
My theory is that the bigger you get, the harder it gets. I mean,
yeah,
the decision making's tougher. You get, I mean, more of the messy stuff lands on your desk than it does when I mean, for me, it's just me and the dog. And the dog don't listen to me anyway. I mean, when I ran a bigger organization, I mean, it was just one problem after another, and the bigger it got, the more problems you get. So I think it's the opposite. People think, oh, it's simple. It's not.
it doesn't, nothing changes. It just is magnified because of the size and the scale.
Yeah.
So
Chris, thank you. It's always a joy.
no,
Thank you for making time to come and have a chat. I mean, a great journey. Having worked in sales myself, I love the proposition you've got. I think it's great. Make people's lives easier, I think, which is
yeah,
what you're doing. So, thanks for making a bit of time to come and have a chat with us about it. I really appreciate that. And good luck going forward. I'm sure it'll be a big success, and I look forward to hearing about it in due course.
excellent. No, and thank you for having me. And yes, it's going to make me think about my biggest mistake. That's one of my takeaways.
Okay. Good to see you, Chris. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.